So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Alice Mishkin. I'm the interim director of the Jewish Communal Leadership Program and a doctoral student in American culture. I really want to thank you all for joining us. We're really excited to have such great turnout. We have over 50 people in the room. And we're just really glad that there are so many people who are here to learn about this important issue. So I want to start by introducing our co-sponsors or thanking our co-sponsors. We have a number of them. So thank you to the Center for Global and Intercultural Study, to Arab and Muslim American Studies, the School of Social Work Office of Global Activities, the Frankel Center for Judaic Studies, the Trotter Multicultural Center, and the Center for Middle Eastern and North African Studies. So thank you all for your support in making this event happen. We are really thrilled today to welcome my friend and colleague, Husam Jubran. We had hoped that Husam would be joining us in person, but as you can imagine, COVID prevented him from traveling. So instead, he's joining us from Beit Zahor outside of Bethlehem, where the weather is unusually Michigan-esque. So it's a little bit snowy and rainy. We're really hoping the storm will not affect his internet connection, but if he cuts out for a minute, we have some ways to get him on backup. So just bear with us if you lose his connection for a moment. So I'll begin with a short introduction of Husam, then he'll tell his story of getting involved in activism during the first Intifada. Then he'll give us an analysis of the current state of activism in Palestine, and we'll have about 20 or 30 minutes for Q&A. So again, I am really delighted to introduce Husam Jubran. Husam is a Palestinian activist trained in nonviolence and dialogue. He's the facilitation director at Hands of Peace, which is a peace-building program for Israeli, Palestinian, and American children. Husam also leads dual narrative tours of Israel and Palestine alongside a Jewish Israeli tour guide for Mejdi, which is a socially responsible tourism company. Perhaps most important, Husam is also the father of 4 really wonderful children. He's Beit Zahor's biggest basketball fan and truly just really a bench. I've known Husam for I think 7 years now, and I really learn something new every time I hear him speak. So I'm really happy to bring his voice to our community. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Husam, and you should all be able to, just a tech issue real quick. So you should all be able to see us and hear us. We can't see you. We'll ask you to use Q&A rather than the chat for asking questions, and we'll get to those in the Q&A session. So now I'll turn it over to Husam.
Thanks a lot, Alice. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for everybody who decided to join today. I want to be fast and short also because of the time limitation. I will start with my story in order to put you in context, and hopefully that will push you later to ask questions. And feel free, please, guys, to ask whatever comes to your minds. I will be happy to address that. When I was much younger, when I was a kid, the first Intifada started. That was 1987, when we had the uprising. Intifada is the Arabic for uprising. Prior to that, I used to be afraid from doing anything political because I didn't want to have problems with the Israeli intelligence, the Shabak, what we call it. Because if I will have a problem with them, I put my life in jeopardy. So I wanted to be the good kid. All the time I wanted to be the good kid. And when I say to stay away from politics, it meant at that time I will not read books talking about Palestine. I will not read novels by Palestinians who are writing about Palestine. I will not even mention the name Palestine, because mentioning it could put me in trouble. Then the Intifada started, and immediately I found myself in the middle of it. How and why, I really don't have an answer. This is something I always try to figure it out, but I can't. But probably I was pushed because situation was awful. I couldn't see hope in the future. And I thought the Intifada is going to bring that hope to me and to my people. So I joined. And when I say I joined, it meant at that time I would throw stones at the Israeli army. I would distribute leaflets to people to tell them what they need to do, boycott Israeli goods, boycott Israeli paying taxes, writing on the walls, putting Palestinian flags on the trees and electricity poles, which is mostly non-violent. And as a result of that, I was arrested. I went to jail. I spent time in jail, went through interrogation, about 54 days of interrogation, awful experience, forget it, put it aside. But it was very meaningful for me, that experience. I usually, when I talk to Jewish audience, I tell them that was a kind of my bar mitzvah, going through this. This is how I get in a way the recognition and the validity of my work. I'm recognized by the enemy that I am worthy, I'm important. And when I was in a prison, I couldn't wait to be released in order to join again. And that's what happened after I finished my sentence. I spent 6 months, released. Actually, probably 2 hours later, I was in the street throwing stones again. And when I was released and continued my activism, I made a decision to myself that next time they're going to come to me, and I was sure they're going to come back to me, I want to make it difficult. I don't want to make it easy for them when they come back. So soon after, probably 3-4 months after, the army came back to arrest me, but they couldn't find me at home because I managed to escape. And that's how I became a wanted person. I lived as a wanted person for almost 3 years, running around, sleeping in different houses, and people around me were very helpful. They will do whatever to help me find the shelter, find food, everything they will afford in order to make as much they can my life comfortable. During those 3 years, I will be chased around with orders to catch me dead or alive. Doesn't matter. And once I was spotted, they chased me, they shot me. Luckily, I wasn't killed, but I got a bullet in my butt. And it was a bad injury because it went through the hip bone and totally crushed it. It took me later on about a year in rehabilitation till I was able to walk again. Luckily, I wasn't arrested because women in the area, in the neighborhood where I was shot, they jumped on the soldiers and they dragged me away from them and took me immediately to the hospital. During my rehabilitation, I will be also hiding in different places. And by the time I was able to walk again, the peace process started, Oslo, what is known as Oslo process. I was one of the people who said no to Oslo. I believed it's not going to bring us any nearer to our hope, and I didn't think it's gonna work. But I was the minority. Only few people like me who said no. The overwhelming majority of the Palestinian people were so excited about it. They thought this is the end of the conflict. We will have our state and we will be able to achieve our aspiration. Unfortunately, I was right in my understanding. But as I said, I was one of very, 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 very few. At that time, it was like a kind for me slap in the face. I wasn't sure what to do. I lost a lot of my education, no activism, because people don't want to do anything. Now is the peacetime. So I stopped being cautious, and that's how I was arrested, because it was easy to be fined by the soldiers. I went to jail, but this time I didn't spend time. And I don't know why I didn't spend time. I was supposed to spend quite a good time. But I think, like, when I think about it, try to understand what happened, probably I usually attribute it to 2 things. One thing, it was a message from the Israeli side to tell other Palestinians, look, here is this guy who's been wanted, and now we're releasing him. This is a new era, new time. So you also should give yourself up. Or it was another way to taint my name by saying Husam now is informant. He gave information to us, and that's why we released him. It didn't make a difference for me. The most important that I was outside. And when I was outside, I decided to think about my future, my personal, individual future, what I need to do next. I lost a lot of my education. I wasn't sure what to do. I managed to bring myself to the university, mostly because of my background, not my knowledge and education. When I went to university, I studied social work and sociology. I know a lot of people here coming from that department. I hated it. I didn't want to be a social worker. It was my only option at that time. And I didn't feel it's something I will be enjoy doing. But again, I didn't have much options. And by the time I finished, I was still searching for myself. At least I said, okay, I have an education, I have a degree in my hand. So in worst case scenario, I can work on it. But by the time I finished, it was like 95. We were allowed to become tour guides. For you are not from here, prior to 1995, we Palestinians couldn't become tour guides. That was only a Jewish Israeli thing. So I took the risk, and it was risky at that time. Everybody around me told me, "You're crazy, you're stupid. Why are you even doing it? Nobody tried it before. It's not gonna work." Thankfully, I didn't listen to them. So I did my diploma in tourism, and when I graduated, I usually said I had only two options at that time, because there were only what I call them JJ tours. And what I mean by JJ tours, Jesus tours, Jewish tours. Jewish tours, of course, out of my league. No Jewish family is going to come and say, "Husam, hey, come, give us a tour in Judaism." So I put all my attention on Jesus tours, and I started to do that for a while, but I wasn't happy. It wasn't fulfilling to me. I didn't think it was the proper way to do tourism. I wanted to bring more. I wanted to bring the conflict. I wanted to bring the struggle, the daily life, and that's how I started to bring politics to my tours, which was also stupid and crazy at that time. Like no one actually supported what I was doing, and thankfully, again, I was a crazy person and I didn't listen to them, and things started to pick up. I started to get more requests from people who are interested in the political situation, who wants to know more about Palestine, Israel. But of course, at that time, my focus was Palestinian society, the Palestinian struggle, to present things from Palestinian perspective only. And by the time it started to pick up, the second intifada started. And when it started, again, everything collapsed. Tourists stopped coming. Second intifada in the year 2000 was very difficult, a lot of violence. And I was determined not to join. I lost faith with my leadership, Palestinian leadership by that time. And I said, I'm not going to put any effort in it, because the first investment was wrong, and there is no guarantee the second investment is going to be right. So I stayed on the side, but I was still searching for a way to support myself, let me say. Luckily, I managed to get the Fulbright scholarship, and that's what took me to the States for a year and a half, where I did my master's in conflict transformation and peace building. And I think, like, when I think about it, everything I studied, I did, though I didn't like it, but it came handy to me later on in my career. And when I came back after finishing my master's degree, I invested mostly in nonviolence. I decided to tackle the issue of nonviolence, and the reason that during the first intifada, I was doing mostly nonviolence things, and usually people talk about it as we were the most violent people in the world. So I wanted to understand that, and I wanted not to present it to the world, but mostly to deal with it within my context, within the Palestinian society. And based on that understanding, I developed the training of nonviolence, where I started to provide training to local activists in West Bank. And it worked. A lot of people joined, and they liked what I'm presenting, changing the perspective, changing the understanding about nonviolence, showing the power of nonviolence. And for almost 3 years, I had a lot of trainees who came and attended to that training. But then I get fed with the civil society, not with the nonviolence, but I lost faith with the civil society. So I quit my job, and I started to do like some kind of consultancy till I came back to tourism. Almost in 2009, I decided to come back to tourism, and the reason is the idea of dual narrative, where a good friend started a new travel agency that with the focus of having two guides, which was very unique, and still I think it's not unique till today. Almost no other travel agency is doing that, where you will have a Jewish guide and Palestinian guide who will take the group for doesn't matter how many days, depends how long they want to stay, 7 days, 3 days, 10 days, providing in-depth tours about everything. It's not, we touch religion, we talk about Jesus, we talk about Muhammad, we talk about Moses, but also we give a lot of attention to the political situation, whether in the past or current or the future. And thankfully, it worked. A lot of people started to come to our tours, universities, like your university, connected with us, and we've been their guide for quite a good period of time. So mostly this is now what I'm focusing on, tourism, and I see it as a form of resistance. It is a tool that allows me to bring the story of my people, to put it in the table, especially that most of the tourists who are coming here to this land, they grew up with the biblical story, which is in a way the Jewish narrative. Barely they are exposed to other narrative, and I think this approach really helps people to get out of their comfort zone without feeling threatened and hearing the other story. Besides, I think it was productive for me because through this experience, I learned a lot about the Jewish history and the Jewish narrative, to a degree that I think with my partner, who we've been working together for quite a good period of time, we developed our own narrative. So now we are really not pushing to call it dual narrative. We prefer to call it multi-narrative or Husam and Yuval narrative. Probably that would be more meaningful. With the focus is to bring everything within the Palestinian society, everything within the Israeli society, Jewish, Muslim, or a Christian. To jump now to, this is my background. I want to jump on nonviolence, and I want to speak about two topics and then open it for you to ask questions. Because like when I keep looking about nonviolence, I think we have two problems. Those two problems, they were never tackled, and I been struggling with it during the past 2 years, especially with the COVID. You know, you're sitting, you're doing nothing, so you start to reflect and thinking about everything. And through those 2 years, I think I will put those two topics, and I'll try to find a good way to phrase them and present them to you as a really a very difficult obstacle to overcome when we deal with nonviolence, and mostly when we deal with the occupation or we deal with the people from the outside world. I think the first one, and in a way, COVID will connect the first one because it impacted it, is the sporadic activism. We don't have centralized strategic approach of nonviolence. So usually you have different activists who are more focused on their locality, and rarely they go on the national level. So even like if you follow first intifada, second intifada, for example, the wall, when the wall was built, each village will confront the wall by itself. So in Jenin area, the villages in Jenin will confront the wall. When it's over, they stop their activism. So then Nablus area, then Ramallah area, then Bethlehem area. And usually the people who will be involved, that specific village that impacted. It may achieve results, and in many cases it gave a lot of results, but it will be very localized. It will not be spread on the national level. Add to that, nowadays, that it's difficult to gather because of the COVID. So it worsened that situation. You hear about activism in Sheikh Jarrah, but it's only about Sheikh Jarrah, though there are a lot of stories in Jerusalem probably it's worse situation than Sheikh Jarrah, like Butn al-Hawa in Silwan, for example, the city of David, the other part, which is another part beside Butn al-Hawa, also in Silwan, and so many other stories. But usually, unfortunately, people will struggle locally. And when you struggle locally, it depends on your capacity, how much you have and how much you can give. So I think this is a major problem for us when we talk about nonviolence, and why it's not seen as an effective tool. It influences also the way we Palestinians will see it, because it will not really bring all good results. This is one thing. The other thing, I will say, the stigmatization. I think there is a problem with the stigma, with that stigma, that usually, especially people from the West, we stigmatize as terrorists. So no matter what we do, first we need to overcome that stigma, because whatever I do, I will be seen as that terrorist. And I will give you two examples that I heard them from some friends. One story from Gaza, and like one friend was talking with him, and he told me the conversation, and that guy was telling him, look, no matter what I do, the moment I say Gaza, people will look to me differently. I'm underprivileged, I am poor, I'm Hamas affiliated, I'm terrorist. So if I need to address all of that before people start to hear me. And I think that's a very major thing in our ability to present things in a different way, though it's there. It's not like it's not there. And the other story, there was a presentation a while ago by the bereaved families. The bereaved families is an Israeli-Palestinian organization. It brings the parents or the relatives of people who lost loved ones in the conflict, whether from the Israeli side or from the Palestinian side. And they sit together and they try to change the situation. They address their societies, and they're doing amazing work. And it's a huge, like, to have someone who lost a brother, a daughter, a son, to decide to come to speak to the other side and try to find a way to change the situation. They were invited to speak in a school in Tel Aviv area. And usually when we say Tel Aviv, it's more liberal. So the impression you will get, oh, it's Tel Aviv, so it should be an easier for them to get to the school. And it's not easy. So when they were there to speak, some right-wing activists demonstrated in front of the school, and their main slogan was, they are the parents of terrorists. And people don't think, okay, you can say that, but people don't realize how tough it is in making their message to come through. Because when those kids, they heard those activists saying, those are the parents of terrorists, this is what is stuck in their mind, that they couldn't see the other side of those people. They couldn't see their humanity, or the work they are doing and how unique it is. They were stuck mostly on that, okay, but you raised a terrorist kid. So I think those two things make it even more difficult for Palestinians to let's say, to put themselves on the table, to make a breach and let their voices be heard. We need to first overcome that in order to be heard, and that's not an easy thing to do. It's really tough, whether locally or internationally. I wish I have answered, tell you, look, this is the best way to do it, but I don't have an answer for that. I will try to figure out something through working with other people, and probably like doing this conversation, doing this speak could help trying to shift in a way, even if it's a little bit, to shift the way people look to us Palestinians. Palestinians. But keep that in mind when we talk about ourselves, and it doesn't matter what kind of resistance we do, violence or non-violence, we are stuck with those two things: the sporadic activism in one hand, and the stigmatization for us as a nation or as a people. So I will stop here, and I will allow to give more time for questions. I think will be more helpful. But to add one thing, if you want really to know more about nonviolence, now you can find it on Netflix. There is a movie called The Wanted 18. It's the story of my town. I'm on that movie, so you can see me in that movie. And I will just give you a briefing. In the first Intifada, we decided to boycott Israeli goods. And we realized that we can convince people to boycott several products, but it will be difficult for us to convince them to boycott the milk and the dairy products because they need it for their families. So we thought, okay, if we need to convince them, we need to start producing our own milk. And that's why we decided to buy cows. We arranged with the kibbutznik from Israel who sold us in a reasonably priced 18 cows. We brought them to my town in order to start a farm and to start to produce milk and distribute it for free for the people, so they will stop buying goods from the Israeli side. To our surprise, 2 days later, the Israeli army came and they threatened us that they're going to take the cows away to confiscate the cows if we don't stop or kill those cows. So what we did, similar to my story, we decided to hide them. And that's how those cows became wanted cows. And I just keep in mind, and probably I will be sarcastic, but in a fun way about it, keep in mind, we had difficulty dealing with normal cows because we are not the people of the cows. It came with the Zionist movement. We are the people of the goats and sheep. But now we need to deal with wanted cows. So imagine the difficulty of dealing with wanted cows. And it proved to be difficult because unfortunately, a month later, we couldn't keep up with moving them around and we ended up slaughtering them. So to get more details, just go to that movie and you will get more about my town. And thanks for coming, and I'm open to questions now.
Thank you so much, Husam. For everybody who's listening, we'll send out a list of resources that Husam mentions in a follow-up email, so we can send a link to the film and other resources that come up. So I want to open it up for Q&A and invite folks to put their Q&A in the Q&A button, not in the chat, so that we make sure that we see it. It's a little hard to follow the chat sometimes. Thank you, Husam, so much for sharing both your personal story and also that analysis. I really appreciated that you focused both on internal issues, sort of thinking about how organizing works internally within Palestinian communities in Palestine, and thinking about how to address external issues and sort of perceptions in the West of Palestinians as somehow exceptionally violent. So I think it's useful for us to think about both external issues and internal issues. I hope that'll come up more in our Q&A. There are a number of questions. So let's just take a moment. Husam, can you see them? I'm sorry, everybody, that I'm 2 years into Zoom.
Yeah, shall I speak?
Okay.
There is one large question. So you read it and summarize it for me. I will start with the first one, which is different, about visiting Gaza. As a it's very difficult to visit Gaza. It doesn't matter if you're Palestinian or non-Palestinian. In order to enter Gaza, like I never been to Gaza, and I don't think I will make it soon. Hopefully, I will make it during my lifetime. But if you are American, you need to be working with high-profile NGO like UN, World Bank, or organization doing something important in Gaza, like water treatment or things like that. You will be able to get a permit from the Israeli side to enter, and it's not like an easy process even getting it. It's unlike any other permit within the Israeli system. So the answer, it's possible, but the possibility is very slim. It's usually very difficult to do that.
Thank you. So I'm going to put into the Q&A so everybody can see the next question. And Jorgen, I'll just select one of your questions, one that I think is probably on the minds of other people. Husam, I'm just looking at the last one. So Jorgen asks, some people criticize the usage of the word narrative, which they feel implies subjectivity to a dangerous degree. Anna Bernard argues that focus on Palestinian narratives might be dangerous to Palestinian rights. In your program, do you find it difficult to consider how to best navigate the equivalence or both sides' legitimacy of these multiple narratives? And I'll just add to that question that I think it's talking about normalization and issues around sort of equating Israeli and Palestinian narratives and experiences.
This is true, but I think I have a leverage here. And my leverage is my background and my knowledge. My background as an activist, it's not easy for people to criticize me, and I put whatever I do in the table. I want people to know what I'm doing, because I usually criticize when people get involved with work in both sides. They usually hide themselves, and I think that is causing more damage to the work we're trying to do. So I want to be on the spot. I want people to know, but I know that many people don't have what I have. And what I mean by that, if people want to come to criticize me, I say it in like arrogant way. Look, have you been in prison? The answer usually will be no. Have you been wanted? The answer usually no. Have you been shot? The answer usually no. So I will tell that person, come on, like I have the whole package. If you didn't go through any of that, don't come and criticize me. So that would be the arrogance answer. The other answer, let's talk about it from conflict perspective. If you want to solve conflict, you need to sit with the other side. You need to understand with the other side. So it depends, like how people approach me. I will decide which side I will answer. But I know the difficulties for many people. And I understand it. I'm not going to judge it, and I'm not going to judge their work. I advise people what to do in regard of those situations, and I understand that I have different situations that allows me probably to break a lot of things that people can do. And I will give you an example. If a month ago I was invited to Jordan, there was a conference by the Ministry of Culture, the Palestinian Ministry of Culture. They invited people to come for that conference to talk about that, to develop a Palestinian narrative outside, not just current narrative, historical narrative, outside of the biblical narrative, archaeology, tourism, and all of that, based on, and that's why I was invited based on my work, and I was clear about it. I thought, look, I do this. I work with with Jewish guide, and I talk about Temple Mount, and they will say Temple Mount, and there was like a lot of discussion about it. And many people, like, they approached me later, and they are in the opposite. They told me, look, we are against you. We're not happy with what you're doing, but we respect what you're doing. And for me, that's important. That you don't hide it. You just put it on the table and let people think about it. So that's why usually I will invite people to talk more about what they do.
Thank you. All right, I'm just looking at the Q&A and trying to pull some questions together. So there are a number of questions about cultural practices around nonviolence and creating more sustainable activism. So I'll put both of them visible so that folks can see. So one of them asks, wait, where did it go? Sorry. Okay. One of them asks, every culture practices nonviolence in its own way up to a point. What aspects of nonviolent struggle have you had to adapt to Palestine in particular? What do you wish you could do differently? Have you gotten encouragement from Jewish Israeli groups? And if so, can you tell us about that?
I'm not sure what's like in culturally. You mean like in my culture, in religion? There is a lot, and like I noticed someone mentioned Mahmoud Darwish. There is also Ghassan Kanafani. Like if you read the novels of Ghassan Kanafani, Men in the Sun, returning to Haifa, there's a lot of culture about nonviolence, and I say it because and this is something I get when I started to work in tourism. People like, oh, how come you became nonviolent? And for me, that was irritating question, because the assumption here that I'm a violent person, and the unusual thing to be nonviolent person. So I started to think about it, and I realized, like, if I wasn't raised to be violent, that's how my parents raised me, that's how my community around me dealt with the situation. So the natural path was to go and see and do all those nonviolent activities. I usually tell people around me, I think it's more difficult for us to teach nonviolence. Like, we raise nonviolence, but it's difficult to keep our kids on the path of nonviolence, because whatever surrounding us is very violent. And keep in mind, like, I like you to make this distinction between structural violence and visible violence. Unfortunately, people see the visible violence, and when you see the visible violence, the oppressor and the oppressed, they are equal. But when you don't see the structural violence, you can't see this inequality between the two sides. So I'm surrounded with the structural violence. When I go through the checkpoints and the way soldiers will treat me there, just to go through the checkpoint, they are the nicest people in the checkpoint, but just going through about it, how I'm going to explain it to my kids, how I will send a message that will keep them on the right path of nonviolence. That's my challenge in a way, because of that structural violence. So culturally, I don't see things that push people to become violence, but we struggle to keep the people or the kids on the path of nonviolence because of the structural violence that's surrounding us.
Thank you, Husam. That's helpful. And Leonor, if there's a way you want to clarify the question and put it in the chat, into the Q&A, we can try to ask it again. I'm going to move on to some questions about international social movements and the role of internationals in Palestinian solidarity activism. So Rachel asks, what other international social movements, if any, have influenced Palestinian activism? And then Leonor asked also about collaboration between Jewish-Israeli groups, Jewish activists abroad in supporting Palestinians. So if you could talk about both inspiration for Palestinian activism and connection with other activist groups.
And I think, like, liberation movements in general aspire the Palestinian people in Africa, Latin America, without giving any special focus on violence or nonviolence. But that liberation movement, in a way, aspired the Palestinian people that they need to work to resist. And I mentioned Ghassan Kanafani. Ghassan Kanafani was assassinated by the Israeli intelligence by putting a bomb under the seat of the car, the driving seat, simply for his writing. And I think mostly because of a sentence he said, who's going to ring the bell? And that message, if you want to translate it, he was telling the Palestinian people, you need to ring the bell. You can't count on other people to do it for you. If you will wait for other people to do it for you, you will remain living under the tent. And he was in the 60s and 70s. Then later, George Habash, one of the leaders of the PLO, he was the founder of the PFLP, he said, revolt, you will lose nothing except the tent and the chain. So when you put those together, you probably start to connect differently how we see the resistance and how we see the struggle. So always, I think, we had that combination and had that influence. And there were specific movements who came to support us, like, for example, the ISM, International Solidarity Movement. They mostly came during the second Intifada, when situation was very awful, especially in Gaza, like Rachel Corrie, American activist who died in Gaza while trying to stop a bulldozer from demolishing homes. So that movement was founded to bring together all those internationals who want to provide support for Palestinian people. Jewish activism also you can't separate it from that. There is a lot of Jewish organization, Jewish individuals, whether locally or internationally, who been doing great things for Palestinians. And just yesterday, we lost a guy. He died naturally, 75 years of age. He was one of the founder of the PFLP. He's from Hebron, and like today they were writing about his life in the web page, in one of the local news web pages. And I noticed that he was very involved with the Black Panther movement, which is not the Black Panther in the state. It's similar to it, but it's related to Mizrahi Jews who were active in the 70s, demanding their rights from the state of Israel. And usually PFLP is presented as an extreme terrorist organization, but here is one of the founders, one of the leaders who was involved on the, or had the connection with those Jewish activists. So even with those who that we broadly look to them as extreme, there was always a way of cooperation between the different sides. You have Combatant for Peace, you have bereaved families, and a lot. I don't want to mention like anyone specific so you will not get to say, okay, I'm recommending this side or that side, but there you can search B'Tselem, Breaking the Silence, and there is a lot of Jewish involvement. And my thing when I started nonviolence, and probably people who criticize me about it, I made it clear when I was involved in nonviolence, any Jewish person, any Israeli person, any international person is welcome to join, but in the back seat, not on the front seat. I'm not going to give them any role of leadership simply because I felt it could disempower Palestinians. When I want to do nonviolence, I want to empower people, and empower people is letting them to make decisions, and people who are here to support us, they need to respect and support that decision. And usually, from my experience, prior to that, when we have internationals or Israeli joining, they naturally, without even processing it and thinking about it, they take that lead. They take the front seat. And I think this is one of the problems when we want to tackle the issue of nonviolence and the cooperation of with other sides. It's not enough just to show support. You need to think how you empower them in all different levels, not just one single level.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions about a resolution to the situation in Palestine and Israel. So there are two questions. The first is, what does long-term success look like for you? And the other is about your end goal, and a question about Israel having a place in the world, or a Jewish state having a right to exist, or a Jewish state having a right to exist.
Okay, let's talk about the end result. I don't have an end result. And when I was younger, I would say, okay, I'm supporter of this solution. I think this is the right solution. With time, with the growth, you start to realize this is wrong. I'm not a supporter of any single solution. I'm a supporter of rights. And when I say rights, I mean everybody. I'm happy first to support any solution that both a good majority of people on both sides, they will feel happy and relaxed to support. I'm not going to say to be against it. I will say, okay, bless you. This is good. Probably I disagree. I will present my disagreement, but I'm not going to say no. I will fight what I will believe is discriminating, what will deprive any group of people from its basic rights or its some certain rights. So I stopped thinking, because and the other thing, if I think of the goal and I say this is my end goal, I will get depressed fast. I will feel the failure fast, and I think it's wrong. That's why I'm more open to do things that other people don't do. I was just talking with Alice before you came in, and I told her next Friday I'm going to speak in a settlement. I'm invited by a settler to go to a settlement to talk to a group. I'm not sure where they are Jewish, but I'm not sure if they are local or they are international. And the settler who invited me to talk, he was not now anymore. He was a hilltop boy, which means that he was very extreme, active in taking all hilltops in West Bank and taking control of West Bank. I met him a while ago. We talked, and it wasn't difficult to find common ground for us. Usually, I'm invited with him to talk with the groups. He presents his story. He presents the way he sees the situation, and I present the way I see the situation. And when he met me, like they used to work with other Palestinian, and he told them, look, I don't want to work with other Palestinian. This guy presents the Palestinian narrative way much better, more, and we need to hear that voice. And that's why he invited me next Friday to go to speak. What I want to say from this story, I'm ready to deal with anyone, and I want people to be ready to deal with anyone without putting a label or a judgment on that person or that work or that activism. Is Israel has the right to stay, or Jewish people? Like, it's there. Like, keep asking this question. Like, I know it reflects that fear inside the person who asked it. I understand that, but Israel is there, and like it's recognized by all the world. They have now relationships with almost all the Arab countries. So I'm not sure what. I don't see there is existential threat in the state of Israel. There are threats, but I really doubt, and I will argue if there is any existential threats. People may disagree, but that's how I see the situation. And when it comes to Jewish state, Judaism, we need to be clear about it, what it means. And I'm not the one who's supposed to define Jewish state or Judaism. I need Israel to define what it means Jewish state. If Jewish state and I have my rights, I have no problem. But if it's Jewish state and it means that Jewish people have superiority over me, then I have a problem with that.
Thank you. We have one more question from the audience, and then I have a sort of closing question for us. The question is, how is it possible to be a public activist and be able to travel throughout Palestine and Israel? I've heard this is incredibly difficult. I wonder, you mentioned checkpoints, if you might just talk a little bit about permits and checkpoints, if you can do that briefly.
Okay, first, this is a good question. When I will go back. I didn't talk about it when I mentioned my story. When I studied tourism, one of the major obstacles for me was how I'm going to work inside Israel. I'm blacklisted. I can't get a permit to go to work. So why I'm even bothering to study tourism and like wasting time and money for something that almost certain I will never get a permit to work inside Israel. Because I was aware about that, the moment I started to study tourism, I went to human rights organization who went to Israeli legal system in order to remove my name from the blacklist. And they succeeded for one simple thing. It wasn't that difficult. The argument was on the court, you brought Arafat back. So if you brought Arafat back, how come you denying this person the right to enter Jerusalem or Israel? And that's how the judge ordered them to remove my name from the blacklist. The other thing I learned, that even like when I started to do tourism, people told me they will be against you, blah, 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 blah. You can't speak politics. And that's totally wrong. I have a lot of Jewish groups asking me to come to speak and do tours for them. And I think that and even I was invited by the Israeli Ministry of Tourism to do a political tour in Jerusalem. The idea, and this is my belief, and I usually push people to be careful what they're saying because it could be interpreted wrongly. You need to be aware that you're not inciting and you are not saying anything racist. As long as you are not inciting violence, and hate, and you are not saying anything racist, no one simply can come and tell you you are not allowed to do this or that. And if someone will come, I will be happy to challenge him legally and social media and everything. And I'm sure I will win that thing. But I know many people, because usually they don't have enough vocabulary, they don't have enough knowledge. Sometimes they say words that will sound for the listener as racist, anti-Semitic, or inciting hate and violence. And probably that's why a lot of tour guides will refrain of doing what I am doing. But as long, let me put it to you this way: as long you know how to, the paradigm of the game, you know how to play the game, you should not be in trouble. And I think that what makes the nonviolence again powerful. I have nothing to hide. I'm putting my things in the table. I will say this in front of Alice. At the same time, I will say this in front of Bennett and Netanyahu.
It's an odd company to find myself in, Husam. Thank you for sharing that. We can also share out a few resources on how Palestinians from different locations within Palestine and Gaza and Jerusalem and inside 48 and the West Bank sort of experience permits differently. So we're happy to send that out as well for a broader perspective on it. I just want to ask the last question. Oh, go ahead. Do you want to say something?
Just to add, like when it comes to permits, people don't, like, just to give an idea, we have at least 107 different kinds of permits. Usually in the permits you are issued, there is a limitation on time, limitation on date, limitation on purpose, like how long you can stay, from which hour to which hour, and the reason you are entering. So if I have a permit for health reason, it means I won't be able to go and sit with my Jewish friend in a coffee shop and drinking coffee because I'm supposed only to go to the hospital. Usually it's from most of the permits from like 5 in the morning, 7 in the morning till 7 in the evening, which means this is where I usually say Israel managed to create a piece of art from the occupation, because I will end up monitoring my situation in order not to violate the rules of the permits and to be simply obedient. And that's what Israel successfully managed to instill in the minds of most of the Palestinians.
So we just have a few minutes left. I just want to say there are a lot of notes of gratitude in the chat and in the Q&A of people really appreciating your talk. So I just wanted to share that and also ask, in parting, you're talking to a group of largely international, largely Western folks. And I'm wondering if you could share, you mentioned sort of suggesting that internationals take the back seat in their allyhood and solidarity. And I wonder if you have sort of parting words of what that looks like for folks who are based in the US, what they can do to support Palestinians.
Yeah, and I think for the internationals, I think their major work is not here. I think it's there. It's in your community. And you have plenty of things to do. In your synagogue, in your church, in your mosque, in your university, in your school, in your neighborhood. And this is where I encourage people to come here. I tell them, come see. Don't listen to me. I'm lying. I'm saying lies. Trust your eyes, not my mouth. Trust your eyes. See the situation. And when you come here and you just go around, you realize you can't hide that there is something wrong. Just go back and speak about it. Tell people around you. For me, politics is not a big thing. Go to your Congress, men or whatever. Just talk to your community. Let them aware. Put our story on the table. Present us as a human being. The moment we are seen as a human beings, things will start to change. And I think that's huge. If those who want to be involved just do their best to see us in a human way without putting judgment. I sit even with leftists, activists, and usually they ask you questions. It simply put a label on us. They don't realize that, but there is that label. So try to be open, don't put that label, and work with your community. That's the best thing you can do for not just for us. It's not because us the Palestinians, also for everyone living here, Palestinians and Jews.
Husam, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing all of your analysis and experiences with us. And I'm just really grateful the internet held out. So thank you. Thank you to our co-sponsors also, and thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. We'll send out resources that Husam mentioned and maybe a few more in the next few days, as well as a recording of this talk. And inshallah, Husam, we'll see you here or in Palestine someday soon.
Inshallah. Thank you all. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. It means a lot. I don't think there's nothing more to say. It means really a lot that each one of you took an hour to come and listen. So thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.